Hello, thank you all for waiting, appreciate it. And thank you all for coming. Quickly going to do some introductions. So I'm Andrea Valdez. I'll be moderating this conversation. I'm from The Atlantic. I'm joined by Amanda Zawrocki, who is a plaintiff in the Zawrocki versus State of Texas case. Samantha Cassiano, who is also a plaintiff in the same case. Nancy Northup, who is president and CEO of the Center for Reproductive Rights. And Liz Monteleone, the interim general counsel for Bumble. Okay, let's get started. Amanda, Samantha, first I want to say thank you for coming, and I also want to thank you for coming to share some deeply personal experience with us on stage. I was hoping that each one of you could take a few minutes and explain to me, maybe we start with you, Amanda, about your experience, your pregnancy experience that led you to the lawsuit, to the Zawrocki versus State of Texas lawsuit.
Sure, I'll start it off. Thank you everyone for being here. So in August of 2022, I was 18 weeks pregnant, and this was a baby that my husband and I desperately wanted, went through a lot of fertility treatment to conceive her. Unfortunately, at 18 weeks, I developed a condition called cervical insufficiency, which basically just meant that my cervix was dilating prematurely. And then my membranes ruptured, and so unfortunately, we knew we were going to lose the baby. And at that point, because my membranes had ruptured, I should have been able to receive an abortion to prevent my life being in danger. But because of the laws that had just gone into effect in Texas, I couldn't get an abortion because the baby's heart was still beating. So we had to wait until I got sick enough to be considered able to get health care. And so what happened to me was I went into septic shock twice, actually, and spent a week in the ICU. And then when we were still in the hospital, my husband and I were like, we have to do something about this. And so that's kind of the short version of how we got to where we are.
And so when you say sick enough, who was determining this?
The state of Texas and Ken Paxton, because of the laws that they had written. The only way that my doctor could have intervened was if the baby's heart stopped beating or if my life was considered at risk. And so for 3 days in between the diagnosis and when I went septic, I was constantly monitoring to see whether I was sick enough to get healthcare. And it took going into sepsis before I could get it.
And then you did get the procedure because your life was threatened.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Samantha, could you tell us a little bit about your experience?
My experience was in 2022, my husband and I found out that we were pregnant. We were shocked, but excited. We went to our 20-week scan, normal, and then we were told that our daughter was diagnosed with anencephaly, which meant that her skull and her brain would not fully develop ever, and that she was incompatible with life. And from there, our lives just changed. We had to go from what now? What do we do now? And our doctor wasn't able to provide us much other than antidepressants and a funeral home paper. And we had to kind of go from there to figure out what's next, what do we do? And then I saw Amanda, and I reached out on a post from a reporter, and then I got a hold of Molly, and I just told her my story. And at first I wanted to be anonymous until I met my daughter, and then full mom mode, I was ready to fight for her and other mothers and babies.
So can you explain, so you carried the baby to term after you found out after 20 weeks that the baby had this condition and gave birth?
Right, I carried my daughter until she was born. It was super hard, emotional, mentally, physically, but I carried her until I gave birth to her.
Thank you for sharing. So then you mentioned kind of what led you to the lawsuit. So you had seen that Amanda was already engaged in this. So can you explain a little bit about what led you to this lawsuit that led you to deciding that you needed to take legal action?
Yeah, My husband and I started speaking out publicly very early after I was discharged from the hospital, actually 10 days after I was discharged, because we had talked about how this was going to impact so many people, not just in Texas, but in other states with similar bans. And we wanted to warn people and educate them. This is what can happen. And so we got engaged in some activism and some advocacy, and through that we were connected to the Center for Reproductive Rights. And people kept asking, are you going to sue? Are you going to sue? And we're like, no, how do you sue the state? How do you sue the Attorney General? That's crazy. But then after meeting with Molly, who's our lawyer at the center, and her team, after about 2 minutes, we were like, okay, we're suing the state of Texas.
All right, Nancy, that brings us to you. I'd love to talk a little bit more about this. So this lawsuit was filed against the state of Texas, where there's obviously been a lot of focus on legislation around reproductive rights. In Texas, my understanding is that there's supposed to be exceptions for medical emergencies to protect the life and health of a pregnant person. And so I'm curious from your perspective, why has this language around what constitutes a medical emergency caused so much confusion among health professionals, among physicians, and how is that tied up in this lawsuit that we're talking about today?
Great, well, let's just back up a little bit to say that so the Center for Reproductive Rights litigated the Dobbs case in the US Supreme Court. We have litigated many cases in the state of Texas over the years. And we knew as we were preparing for the loss, like everybody knew, right, after both the oral argument and the leaked draft opinion, that the case was going to be lost, that Roe versus Wade was going to be overturned. And we knew that a consequence was going to be what has happened here for both Samantha and for Amanda, just the tip of the iceberg about women here in Texas and across the country in states that ban abortion. And so we knew this was going to happen. The question was, how were we going to be able to have women who were able to stand up as both of them have done. And so what we knew was going to happen, because these exceptions, and they've existed in various bans that have been passed in other states, we knew that they weren't going to be real, that you weren't going to be able to access them. Texas says in its legislation that if your life is at risk or if you're at risk of a substantial health situation, that you can have access to abortion care. But as we see, that just doesn't happen. So we sued Texas. It was about 1 year ago, standing in Austin in front of the state capitol, so that we were holding to account those elected officials who have passed these laws. And in Texas, one of the potential consequences for violating the abortion law, if you're a doctor, a provider, or someone who's helped someone get an abortion, is 99 years in prison. So it's a life sentence. And so doctors, when they're trying to figure out giving care to patients, have this draconian 99-year, ban behind them. And so we sued for clarity, but the state of Texas doesn't want clarity, because they have opposed us in this lawsuit every step of the way. And then another woman who was familiar with the lawsuit, Kate Cox, who was pregnant when we represented her in December to sue the state of Texas so that she could end a pregnancy that was risking her health. And went all the way up to Texas Supreme Court. They didn't answer her soon enough. She had to leave the state and go to New Mexico. And then shortly after, the Texas Supreme Court said, you weren't eligible anyway. So every step of the way, the state of Texas has opposed having any clarity on this, and this is the consequence.
And just to be clear about this clarity, so the basis of the lawsuit is that there is no clarity when it says medical exception, that physicians don't feel like they know exactly what that means, what a medical exception is. And can you talk a little bit about the Kate Cox case? Because I think that part of the reason, from what I understand, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that she brought that case is because she was actively experiencing, a medical emergency. And the idea was to file the lawsuit in the moment that she was experiencing the medical emergency in hopes of trying to at least get a little bit of clarity there. Can you maybe explain a little bit? Because it feels like it's a little hard to understand. Would love for you to explain why that was so important that Kate Cox filed that lawsuit in that moment.
Right, well, Kate is the mom of 2 children and wants to have a big family, and she was pregnant with her 3rd child and was diagnosed with a fatal fetal anomaly at about, I think, 18 weeks or so. And It was risking, she's had 2 C-sections, so she was at risk of uterine rupture, which can both be deadly and also destroy your future fertility. And so she got in contact with us, and we filed the lawsuit in very short order because it was important to get it resolved. And the district court, the trial court, who heard the testimony, said it would be a miscarriage of justice for her not to get this abortion. And again, to go back to the state of Texas at that point could have said, okay, it's been adjudicated, we have an exception, a judge has ruled, you may go forward with the abortion. That's not what's happened. The Attorney General of the state of Texas, Ken Paxton, said, don't you dare, to the hospitals and doctors in the state, don't you dare give her an abortion under this court order, took it up to the Texas Supreme Court. So that is, you know, clearly Texas does not want there to be any access to abortion care because they are fighting every attempt we have to get clarity on the law.
Can I ask, I mean, sorry to focus so much on Texas. We are in Texas, so it's hard not to. And of course, these cases deal with the state of Texas. Can I ask a little bit about, there's also, I'm unclear, and I'm sure a lot of people, that's what we're trying to get some clarity on is in this conversation. It seems like 3 different laws in the state of Texas. Can you explain a little bit about that? And is that complicating things as well, the fact that there's these 3 different laws that are about abortion, and is that further causing confusion? Is that a tactic, is that a strategy, or is that just like happenstance by the way that the legislation has rolled out over time? I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about that, Nancy.
Yeah, and thank you for pointing out that, of course, this is a problem in other states as well. We've sued Idaho on behalf of women in similar situations. We have also sued the state of Tennessee. I would expect more to come because this is happening. After Amanda's case was filed here in Texas, our phones were ringing off the hook with women from throughout the country that were facing the same thing. So what's also, unfortunately, a theme in other states, not just Texas, is that there are multiple bans on abortion, some which will be enforced criminally and some civilly. So in Texas, what's going on right now is you have, first of all, a pre-Roe ban. Okay, that, you know, for almost 50 years we had Roe versus Wade, which of course came out of the state of Texas, and that was enjoined. And after Roe versus Wade was overturned, the state of Texas said, okay, let's take that very old law and bring it back into force. Then we have the SB 8, which was a civil vigilante lawsuit that Texas enacted before. It was in 2021. Which said that if you had an abortion after 6 weeks, even though it was constitutional under Roe versus Wade, that anybody could sue you for $10,000, not sue you, but sue your doctor or anyone who helped you, like, you know, your friend or the Uber driver, for $10,000 or more at a very minimum. And then we have this, you know, 99-year ban. So we have these 3 different bans going on. Does it make it more complicated? Any one of them alone is a problem. So, but it certainly doesn't give any medical professional the kind of assurance that they could have to go forward.
Amanda, Samantha, so both of you, like you said, have come out. You're obviously here today sharing your story. You've spoken very publicly about your experiences. I was hoping you could tell me a little bit about what your experience has been in sharing those stories. Have you received you know, I'm sure you've received all sorts of attention. I'm curious if you could just talk a little bit about that. Maybe Samantha, we can start with you.
For myself, yes, and family and friends have reached out, colleagues that I didn't tell their current, just like, hey, I know what you're doing and I'm proud of you. And so for the majority, it is positive. I have had some family that is negative, that they've chosen to no longer speak with me anymore. For them, I am a disappointment, and that hurts, but ultimately I have to do what's right for me and my family, and this is it, so.
Wow. You know, I'm continually blown away by Samantha's courage and similar folks in her situation. I have been very fortunate. My family, my husband's family are very supportive. Folks across the board have been supportive and encouraging. I was very fortunate to meet Brittany Watts yesterday for the first time. And if you're familiar with her story, she is from Ohio and she miscarried at home and was criminally charged. Nancy, you can fact check me on that. But that's the gist of what happened with her. And she shared with me yesterday that she has received death threats for speaking out. She has had someone called the police and said that they were her boyfriend and that they had shot her and she was dead. And so it was, a SWAT team. And she is a person of color. And I recognize my privilege in this, being that I'm white, and we know that these bans disproportionately affect people of color. And that's a big motivation for why my husband and I continue to speak out, because we don't have that same fear. And we recognize that we're privileged in that. And so again, Sam, I'm just blown away by you.
Thank you.
And I'm curious, both of you, just, how has your employer felt? Have you had any support from your employers on this issue as well?
For myself, when I found out immediately, I went in and I spoke with my team lead and then my boss, and they were very supportive, thankfully, because I don't know what would I have done if they weren't as supportive. Having to go into office pregnant, and the baby questions, and oh my gosh, how far along are you? What are you having? And such, there was no way I was going to be able to do that. And they were very supportive to shield me, and I was able to work from home.
That's great.
Likewise, yeah.
Likewise.
My employer's been great.
Liz, I'm curious, this dovetails with your work at Bumble. For people does everybody here know what Bumble is? Okay, great. Just wanted to make sure. So, women-centric, women-led app, that ostensibly is about dating, family formation, I would imagine, down the line for a lot of these folks. I was hoping that you could talk to us a little bit about Bumble's involvement in this lawsuit. They're based here in Texas. You filed an amicus brief with this lawsuit. It feels very significant for a well-known employer in the state to vocalize support. Why did the company feel compelled to do this?
So, as you said, Bumble is women-founded, women-led, and gender equality has been central to our mission from day one. And with that, we think women's empowerment is key. Our mission is to create a world where all relationships are healthy and equitable. We've always supported reproductive rights, but throughout the years, as we've seen these continued attacks on women, our voice in that support has gotten much louder. So when SB 8 came down, we're headquartered right here in Austin, Texas. When SB 8 came down, one of our immediate steps was to make sure that we were taking care of our employees here and around the globe and throughout the US who might be impacted. And then we were starting to raise our voice on social media. When Dobbs was overturned, we took out a billboard in Times Square on the NASDAQ billboard, again, reiterating our view that reproductive rights are human rights. Abortion is healthcare. Healthcare is a human right. And we were very firm in that stance, but we were always looking for a way to get more tangibly involved. When SB 8 came down, I've offered many, many times to try to get arrested so that we could challenge the law. Apparently, it's not a very good look if your legal team gets arrested. So that didn't work out. But we were in talks with the center already, and we came to them and said, what can we do? How can we help? And they were telling us about this lawsuit and helped us find this opportunity to write this amicus brief that argues from the position of businesses that are impacted by these restrictive laws. We know that abortion has an impact on individuals, but there's a profound negative impact on society as a whole, and particularly for businesses. We were looking at the lens, and what we were putting forth in the brief was talking about the increased cost to us to attract and retain talent in Texas, the increased costs for us to provide healthcare benefits to our employees. So, we found that because of our position having been founded with women at the forefront from the beginning and having that voice and that legitimacy to begin with, we could combine that with this very business-centric argument and help support the case.
And do you think that that's been resonant with business leaders in the state?
I think so. We were very proud of how many other businesses signed on to this amicus brief. We had businesses from across Texas, some that are headquartered here, some that are headquartered throughout the rest of the US, but our corporate peers, we've received a lot of support from them, and we continue to call on all of our other peers to find opportunities to get involved as well.
Now, have you at Bumble, or have you heard of other businesses that, you mentioned this a moment ago, have had trouble recruiting and retaining talent? Have there been people at your company who have unfortunately had to leave because they've made the decision that for them they can't live in Austin or in Texas, I suppose, or in any of the states that I'm sure you have employees all over that are being impacted, not just here?
So we, since SB 8, have seen a reduction in our Texas workforce by about a third. Those employees are choosing to move elsewhere. There are a variety of laws in Texas that I think many people find incompatible with living a healthy life and being their authentic self. So we are a remote-first company, and we've supported employees who've chosen to move out of state, and we will no longer require individuals to join in Austin, even though we are headquartered there.
And can you talk a little about, you also mentioned in the amicus brief that, it seems as though there's a lot of people who are actively leaving the state, that there's a big chilling effect. Is it something that other businesses have talked to you about this same thing? I mean, I feel like there was maybe more than a dozen instances of people who had said that they were either leaving the state or they weren't coming to the state. Are those people who were other businesses that filed in the amicus, or is that just through your research that you were finding that that was also happening?
It's both. We've heard anecdotally from our peers that signed the amicus brief with us that they will have similar challenges attracting and retaining talent in particular. And then, of course, we hear from members of our community and members all over that these are considerations of theirs when they're thinking about if they're going to accept a job, if they're going to stay at a job. The consideration about location is a very real factor.
And you talked a little bit a moment ago about some of the things that you were doing to provide resources to your employees. What does that look like? And is that something that other businesses are sharing with each other about what it is that you do in order to share resources with your employees who might be looking for these services and can't get them in the states where they live?
Yeah, so we introduced enhanced benefits, including opportunities to cover costs for individuals who seek the full spectrum of reproductive rights, whether that's abortion, IVF, surrogacy, egg freezing. It can also cover things like gender-affirming healthcare. So we have that available to our employees on a confidential basis. And we do know that there are other companies that have introduced similar benefits for their employees as well. I'm trying to think off the top of my head there were some very vocal advocates for that, certainly right after SB 8 came into effect. But, again, we wanted to immediately make sure that we were taking care of our employees. And so this was an additional benefit on top of allowing individuals, unlimited time off and access to mental health resources that we are already providing.
And have you received any blowback? What was the reaction when Bumble did this? Because, it was something that was pretty public.
It was. We have had a very supportive reaction when we have come out, and some of our most memorable moments have been when we have spoken out on behalf of women, and particularly in support of reproductive rights. Again, because we are mission-driven and we have been since day one, we have been, advocating for women's rights and speaking out against the retrogression of women's rights. It wasn't new for us. It's something that our community very much expects from us. So when we were looking at this opportunity, when we've thought about any of the other times where we've taken very vocal stances in support of reproductive rights, we feel that it is important that we do speak out because it's a bigger risk to us and our, legitimacy as a brand that supports women if we were to say nothing.
Well, I'm sure you're watching the news right now from a business perspective, what's happening with IVF in Alabama. I was hoping we could talk a little bit about that today. I know it's not necessarily Texas or this particular case, but recently the Alabama Supreme Court ruled that frozen embryos are children and protected by state law. This caused a panic in the state with clinics pausing IVF services. And then 2 days ago, very breaking news, the Alabama governor signed into law legislation that offers clinics, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Nancy, civil and criminal immunity in the event of the destruction of an embryo. But there was no language that changed the idea that embryos outside of the body are considered children. And am I getting it right? Great. Nancy, can you talk a little bit about the implications of this fetal personhood, this notion of the embryos living outside of the body being considered children, or just the concept of fetal personhood in general. Is this a new battleground in kind of the legal fight?
Well, it's been a battleground for a long time because those who oppose individuals and families for making their own decisions about their reproductive health, their family formation, have been pushing embryonic personhood for a very long time.
And can you explain why?
And on a theological basis, that a fertilized egg has the same rights and should have the same rights as a full-blown person. This is not the law. The United States Supreme Court has made clear, and it's not been reversed by Roe versus Wade, that only born persons have constitutional rights. And the theology of it, the Alabama Chief Justice wrote a concurring opinion in the case, which was completely biblical and theological, which should not have a place in American jurisprudence. We have separation of church and state, should rely on legal concepts. But this concept has been, a battleground for a long time. And, but I want to just point out that none of these are popular with the American people. The voters of Mississippi, well over a decade ago, voted down an attempt in Mississippi to establish fetal personhood in their constitution. And they understand that it means a threat to things like IVF and to contraception and elsewhere. So it's really important that people pay attention to it, that the fact that, Alabama politicians scrambled to try to fix the issue doesn't fix it. All of this, whether we think about getting access to the maternity care that you should get, and that includes termination of pregnancy and abortion in certain circumstances, ending a pregnancy for whatever reason, building your families through IVF. All of these are about the basic fundamental right in a free society for reproductive autonomy, for people to be able to make the decisions about their families. It's one of the most important decisions that we make in our lifetime. And so this is really an ideological battle that we need people off the sidelines. Like every single person on this stage has gotten off the sidelines, whether it's Bumble, whether it's Amanda and Samantha, of standing up. And that's what we need. 70% of the United States public supports the right to abortion. And so we need to have people, and particularly the Center for Reproductive Rights, in addition to going to court, has been working with companies who understand that this is an issue that should be left to their employees and their customers and should not be one. It is bad for business. And we actually, I think later in the program, we'll have a QR code that's going to go up if you want to learn more about how, if you are an employer, that you can stand up and really oppose these. It is terrible. It is not safe to be pregnant in any state that bans abortion. And so we need companies to get off the sidelines, and many, Levi's, Lululemon, H&M, a lot of companies are, and we need more to join them.
Well, it's interesting you talk about how there is not public support for a lot of this legislation. And I'm curious, Samantha, Amanda, if either of you, in people hearing your stories, if they've come to you and been surprised about what abortion legislation means, because it doesn't feel like this kind of binary, you're for it or against it. There's this big gray in the middle of situational circumstances that you both embody. And I wonder if you've had conversations with people where it feels as though it's complicated their view on the issue.
Absolutely, 100% it has. After I was diagnosed, before I went septic, our family, who lives in the Midwest, so very similar climate, just did not understand. They were like, why can't you get healthcare? Like, why are you in this situation? Why are you waiting? So there's a lot of explaining we had to do. And we're from Indiana. It's fairly conservative. We have fairly conservative family and friends. And a lot of them have changed their opinions. A lot of them have changed their votes. And so, I think we're really seeing a shift in how people think about abortion as just healthcare, which is what it is.
Samantha, have you had a similar experience, or?
Yes. So my mother, we were raised Catholic, and for her, abortion is a no-go. There's nothing. And then I went through the situation, and my mother cried and she hugged me and she told me that she understands now and she gets it. And hearing all the women that I tell her about, and she's like, wow, just wow, I can't believe that I thought this way for so long and my own daughter needed it. And she tells me, I'm here for you now, I hear you. And she tells everyone now. She now tells everyone, and abortion is healthcare. It is. So it's definitely different in my household now than it was before for a majority of my family.
And is this something that the business community is also seeing in the employee base, or people, being more vocal? Is this something that has come up among employers and employees?
I do think we're seeing companies begin to feel more confident in being vocal with this. Again, we know that these bans are bad, period. They are bad for individuals, but they are also bad for business, and I think companies are seeing when others are stepping forward and being vocal in their advocacy and their support, and it's, empowering others to get involved as well. So I do think, we see the numbers. We know that the majority of people in the United States support some form of access to abortion. So I think there is a general trend in that direction for companies finding their voices.
And after the Dobbs decision came down, a lot of really big companies that may not have stepped out yet into the policy arena, but in terms of their own company policies, first of all, they cover abortion care in their healthcare policies, and they were covering travel out of state. Big banks and big manufacturing companies, and all of them are clearly in their corporate policies understand that abortion care is healthcare, and so it's like making sure that people can take that next step and be public about it from a policy perspective, because we are going to ultimately need to have federal legislation that protects the right to abortion care. And so we need support in that as a policy matter, because that's the only way we're going to be able to get this, 70% who support the right to abortion to be able to make sure no matter what state you live in and no matter what reason that you're able to get the health care that you want.
And do you think that the IVF situation is actually going to draw more attention and make people even more, it's going to be something that people are paying more attention, because it feels like something like IVF that people really actively want? If that's under threat, will it activate them?
Yes, because I think that people are coming to see and realize that when we talk about reproductive health care, and this has always been true, we mean all of it, right? We mean what kind of contraception you may choose to plan your family. It means the access to fertility care if you're having infertility issues. It means the access to good maternity care when you're pregnant, right? I think about these cases. They're maternal health cases as well as abortion cases. In your case, it's also an assisted fertility case. It's not all separate. It is all within the realm of reproductive health care, which is ultimately about health and well-being. And I think every time, all of a sudden, we have to stop looking at it as, wait, this is an IVF thing, or this is about, opposition to, IUDs, or this is about, abortion care. All of it together, it's about the ability to control your health and your fertility and your life plan, ultimately. And so I think people are beginning to see that we can't chop it up. What we ultimately need, and people want in this country, to live in a free country where you're making these important decisions for yourself. People expect to be able to do it, and that's what they want.
Amanda, it was kind of referenced that you are looking through to IVF as potential to expand your family. Is this something you've been thinking about with regards to the Alabama legislation, and where is your head at on that right now?
You said there was panic in Alabama. There was panic in my household as soon as we heard that. So we have 2 frozen embryos, which is great. We're very thrilled about that. And some of you might also have frozen embryos. So I'm curious if any of you had these same thoughts that went through my head when we heard about Alabama. These are the insane things that my husband and I actually discussed. Okay, first of all, can we deduct them on our taxes this year? They are very expensive to store. If I store them in perpetuity, is the state going to pay for that? If we transport them out of the state of Texas and something goes wrong, is that human trafficking? We have to use a surrogate now because of what the state put me through. If she gets pregnant with my embryo and then has a miscarriage, is that involuntary manslaughter? Is that wrongful death? I mean, it's insane, the rabbit hole that you can go down with this. And, you know, it's great that the governor in Alabama signed that bill for the protections, but I mean, the damage is done, right? And if you've been through IVF, you know how critical the timing is. To delay an hour can be catastrophic to someone's cycle. And so my heart was just shattered for all of those families in Alabama who were delayed. Some of them missed entire transfer windows. It's devastating. And to have to go through that because the state is telling you that you don't have control over the way that you plan your own family is just, it's cruel. And so my husband and I actually did make the decision to move our embryos out of Texas, somewhere that we feel they'll be safer.
Wow. Have either of you ever felt compelled to leave the state just given what has happened, or is it something where, no, you wouldn't leave?
Well, we're born and raised here, and this is all we know. So, no. Maybe a slight thought when we were trying to figure out where are we going to go for health care. But ultimately, our life is here, our seeds are here. So it's just unfair for us to make that move when they're being unfair to us. It's cruel. So to move our whole family out because of them or someone else, to me, is almost like running away. And I want to stand here and I want to fight until it's right.
Has it ever crossed your mind, or do you feel the same?
No, I feel the same. Couldn't say it better.
We also have time for Q&A if people, I think should be a way to do that. I'm not sure, but wanted to let folks know. But I have some more questions, of course. So I wanted to ask Nancy, so where are we currently in the case, in the Zorowski versus State of Texas case? Where are we right now, and kind of what do you see happening next?
So it's been argued before the Texas Supreme Court in November, I think, and we're waiting for a decision from that court. I mean, it is the court that did not give Kate Cox an abortion in December when we were before that court. So we shall see what happens. But, you know, whatever happens, first of all, it's critical to continue to stand up and to have others stand up and hold the state of Texas accountable. And it's also, we are winning in the court of public opinion. I mean, let's just go back to Kate Cox for a moment. In December, when her case hit the news, in 1 week, there are 25,000 news articles about it. She was just at the State of the Union last night as a guest of the First Lady. The President of the United States referenced her in his address to the nation. I mean, it's been transformative in terms of being on people's radar. And the number of, we got so many letters and, you know, calls and emails about, we want Kate to know that she's not alone and she's so brave. We actually had to open a portal on our website so that people could just put the emails in there. So the court of public opinion is really important, and we can't ever let a bad Supreme Court decision, and that's what the Dobbs case is, be the last word of it. We're not going to. We're going to make sure that, you know, these voices get lifted up and heard. Whatever the Texas Supreme Court does, we're going to continue fighting.
And do you know when that decision could come? Is it like, what determines that?
Any day.
Any day.
When they're done writing.
And do you have a sense of a likely outcome, or is it could be anything?
I mean, we will see.
And does it end with the Texas Supreme Court, or can it continue?
It ends, we have sued under Texas's Constitution. So all of us have our rights under the federal Constitution, which the Supreme Court just took away with respect to abortion rights and rights under a state constitution. But it doesn't mean that it's the end of suing the state of Texas, because they're going to continue to violate the rights of people in the state who are pregnant.
So there could continue to be similar similar cases brought over and over again in perpetuity? Sorry, I'm just not.
We'll see. I mean, case was brought now on behalf of 22 plaintiffs. A couple of them are doctors who can't practice their profession and care for their patients as they were. The rest are individuals like Samantha and Amanda. But we'll have to see what the Supreme Court says, but we're not going to stop. We're going to continue to hold the state accountable.
Yeah. I actually also wanted to ask, there's this narrative that's emerged that suggests that the legal framework and legislative strategies that have been established by anti-abortion legislators and advocates have been really tight and really focused, and that's how we ended up with Roe being overturned. That's how we wound up, with some of the legislation that we're seeing on the state level. Nancy, as someone who's thinking about these legal strategies and tactics, what do you make of that narrative?
Well, I fundamentally disagree with it. I would say that the Supreme Court's decision in Bush v. Gore is what got us to where we are today. I mean, people have to remember that there has just been a series of things that have fallen, on the favor side of those who wanted to overturn Roe versus Wade. Number one, some hanging chads in the state of Florida and the U.S. Supreme Court deciding in the 2000 election that they were going to hold the count in Florida. That could have come out different. George W. Bush got to put 2 conservatives on the Supreme Court because of that, right? Justice Ginsburg died right before the 2020 election, and President Trump pushed through a nominee. President Obama didn't get his nominee to the Supreme Court with Merrick Garland because the Senate did something they'd never done before, which is not get the president their appointee to the Supreme Court. So we have a Supreme Court because of a bunch of those kind of things. We also have structural issues in our American politics with the way the Senate has 2 senators for every state, and that includes a lot of states with just 500, 600,000 people. So that narrative that somehow it's been a smart strategy, no, it's been a seizing of power, which we have to fight against. The majority of the American people don't like this. They are opposed to it. They want people to be able to make these decisions for themselves.
And so then what do you think is the most powerful way to establish some sort of national framework that would counteract a lot of these state level pieces of legislation? What is the thing that has to happen? Is it just suing at the state level? Are there lawsuits that have to happen at the national level? Or is it the business community, or just like you said, stories and people coming out? I'm kind of curious what you think might actually have the most powerful way to kind of, again, change things maybe at the national level.
With everything, when you're fighting for change, it's an ecosystem. So to begin with, every single person using their voice is absolutely critical. So whether it's a company, whether it's people standing up in a lawsuit, whether it's people talking on social media, all of that is incredibly important. The ballot initiatives that are going on in every single state, so far they've been won, Ohio and Michigan and Vermont and California, protecting the right to reproductive freedom in their constitutions. Those words never appeared in any state constitution until after the Dobbs case and Roe versus Wade was overturned. Florida's going to be on the ballot. Colorado's going to be on the ballot. Missouri, maybe Arizona, and others this year. So that's really important. But there are states like Texas that is not going to solve the problem. There's federal legislation, the Women's Health Protection Act. It has passed the House of Representatives twice, got 49 votes last time it was voted on in the Senate. It would establish the right to abortion across the nation. So all of these things are important, but again, for everyone to think about what they can do to ensure that their voice is heard. Finding your voice is the theme of this panel, and again, it's really important for businesses not to be on the sideline. The chaos that's going on in these 14 states that ban abortion, the more that are trying to, it's bad for business.
Do you think there could be some legislative, some legal cases that businesses could bring that would have an impact? Liz, I'm curious your perspective from the business perspective, if that's something where, on a national level, could a case be brought?
I think we would, of course, be open to an opportunity like that should it arise. I think, the impact is usually at the individual level, and the ability to challenge these tends to be, by those who are directly impacted. But if a path were to exist, we're constantly looking for other ways to continue to get involved and to encourage other companies to get involved. So should it arise, I'm sure we would be one of the first in line to support.
But I guess my question really is like, what would a case have to look like? That could that happen? Could there be a case that a business brings that could have national ramifications for abortion protection?
I think that's a great question. I am not sure how that exact path forward would be. Nancy, I don't know if you've had a chance to ideate on how the companies can actually start suing the states.
Well, my guess about the way some of the bigger companies might get hauled into this is when states go after them for their employee benefit policies, like supporting their employees for going out of state. Because some states have threatened those kind of employers about their policies that allow their employees to go out of state. I think you're going to see this overreach of trying to say to companies, you think this is a decision for your employee benefits? Well, we want to make that decision for you. And I think that's how some of the companies may be brought into a bigger suits.
That's interesting. So that hasn't happened. No state has enforced that or done anything about that, but there's been just threats,
The state of Texas, there's the House Freedom Caucus here, I believe, is the one who sent letters to law firms. They've sent it to other companies. We did not receive a letter yet threatening them for their policies that would support individuals traveling out of state to seek abortion care. So in Texas, I know that they've sent those letters to companies.
Wow, interesting. Well, one of the things I wanted to end on, we're kind of getting close to the close here. I wanted to ask you both, Amanda and Samantha, what is it that you might tell people in the state of Texas or in other states that have some of these abortion bans? Should they get pregnant? I mean, I'm sure people are wondering that, I know you can't exactly tell them what to do, but I'm curious what you would tell a woman who's really weighing, or tell a person who's really weighing, should I or shouldn't I have a family, because I'm not sure if I'll have access to the healthcare that I might need.
I would tell them to take deep breaths. It's dangerous to be pregnant in Texas. Of course, having a family, that's a big thing in your household. So regardless, if you're going to try to have a family, take deep breaths and learn what you can do if a certain situation does come about. That way you're ready and you're prepared for the situation. And speak about it. If, God forbid, you are in a situation like ours, speak about it, because not every story is our story or Amanda's story. You have your own story, and not every pregnancy is a healthy pregnancy. So the more that you speak about it, the more that hopefully somebody else doesn't have to go through that.
I think the first thing you need to do is educate yourself on the laws in your state, your own doctor, how might they behave in a situation like this, where do they practice, what stipulations are they tied to because of the hospital where they have privileges. I think that's really important. And my husband, he is the most optimistic guy in the world, but he's got kind of a bleak outlook on this. And we've actually had conversations with friends who have become pregnant since our ordeal. And he said, look, you gotta pack 2 bags. You gotta have your go bag for, the good one for when you're going to the hospital and you're bringing home a baby. And you gotta have the one if you have to flee. And it's bleak, but it's also reality.
You did mention that you have to familiarize yourself with the legislation in your state. Nancy, I'm sure that the Center for Reproductive Rights has resources on this. I'm curious to know, how can people actually familiarize themselves with what is going on in their state?
Yes, we do have on our website, which is reproductiverights.org, we have a 50 states that you can click on and find out about what is the situation in your state. You can sign up for email alerts. And so all of that is really, really important to do. And then, of course, also, anybody can call the Center for Reproductive Rights. If you're in a state and you run into a situation with your state, we're happy to talk to you about potential representation.
Well, I think we're going to have to leave it there for now. Thank you all so much. I really appreciate it, and thank you all for coming and talking and listening to our talk.
Thank you.